A secret experiment buried deep beneath the surface of Mars had remained hidden from the prying eyes of the universe. The project, codenamed Prometheus, was Earth's most classified initiative, a desperate attempt to counter the overwhelming power of the Galactic Dominion. The Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds, enslaving countless species, and now, humanity stood as its next target. Earth's military leaders knew they could not match the Dominion's vast fleets or advanced technology. Instead, they needed something unexpected, something the Dominion could not anticipate. Inside an underground research facility, Dr. Evelyn Carter, Earth's leading bioengineer, stood before the culmination of decades of forbidden science. A lone figure lay in the center of the chamber, connected to an array of machines humming with energy. This was no ordinary soldier. This was Project Prometheus, a human enhanced beyond natural limits, built to surpass any known species in intelligence, strength, and adaptability. Commander Alex Voss, the head of Earth's Special Forces, watched through reinforced glass as the experiment reached its final phase. The subject's vitals remained stable, but what concerned him was the unpredictability of the enhancements. "Are you sure this will work?" Voss asked, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. Dr. Carter hesitated for a moment before responding. "There is no certainty, Commander. But if we do nothing, humanity will fall. This is our only chance." Before Voss could reply, alarms blared throughout the facility. A Dominion scout fleet had entered Mars orbit, moving directly toward the base. They had been discovered. "How?" "We masked all signals," a technician shouted. "They must have intercepted fragments of our research transmissions," Carter muttered, realizing their secrecy had been compromised. Voss turned to the control panel. "Can we activate him now?" Carter hesitated. "The process isn't complete. His neural pathways are still forming. If we wake him too soon, we don't know what he'll become." Voss didn't have the luxury of patience. "Do it. If he's our only chance, we take it now." Reluctantly, Carter entered the command sequence. The machines surged with energy as the figure in the chamber convulsed. His eyes snapped open, glowing with an eerie light. His body tensed, every muscle fiber adapting instantaneously to its new reality. He inhaled deeply, and then he spoke. "What am I?" Voss stepped forward. "You're humanity's last hope." The Dominion's forces landed outside, plasma cannons primed to breach the facility's defenses. Inside, the soldiers braced for impact, knowing that if the enemy broke through, there would be no escape. Voss turned to the newly awakened warrior. "Can you fight?" The figure stepped forward, flexing his fingers as if discovering his own body for the first time. His mind processed thousands of combat techniques, analyzed every possible outcome of the battle ahead, and formulated the most efficient way to win. His voice was calm. "Yes." The moment the Dominion breached the outer walls, the experiment moved. Faster than human eyes could track, he met the invaders in a blur of motion. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, but he dodged with impossible precision. His strikes shattered exoskeletons, crushed armor, and snapped bones with ruthless efficiency. The Dominion soldiers, seasoned warriors who had crushed entire civilizations, found themselves overpowered by a single man. Voss and his troops watched in awe as the experiment tore through the invaders, his every movement a display of perfect lethality. He adapted with every attack, learning from each strike, growing stronger, faster, more precise. Within minutes, the battlefield was silent. The Dominion forces lay in ruins, their bodies twisted and broken. The experiment turned to Voss. "More are coming." Voss knew he was right. The scout fleet was only the beginning. Once the Dominion realized what had happened, they would send an armada. There was no more hiding. Humanity had revealed its trump card. Dr. Carter stepped forward, placing a hand on the experiment's shoulder. "We need to get you off this planet. If the Dominion captures you, they'll dissect you, replicate you." The experiment nodded, his enhanced mind already calculating the next steps. "Then we strike first." Voss smirked. "I like him already." Outside, the Dominion fleet regrouped, preparing for a full-scale invasion. But for the first time in their history, they faced something they did not understand. And what they did not understand would destroy them. The Dominion fleet in Mars orbit had already begun transmitting reports back to the High Command. The destruction of their ground forces was incomprehensible. Humanity, a species barely worth mentioning in the galactic order, had just done something unthinkable. A single soldier had massacred their elite strike team. It was impossible. It was terrifying. Inside the underground facility, Voss was already coordinating the evacuation. Earth's defense forces were scrambling to intercept the incoming Dominion reinforcements, but everyone knew they wouldn't hold for long. This base, this project, had to be abandoned. Dr. Carter moved swiftly through the lab, collecting every piece of research data onto an encrypted drive. We need to get this to Earth's High Command. If we lose this information, we lose our only advantage. Voss glanced at the experiment, who stood near the breach where he had torn through the invaders. He was staring at his own hands, flexing his fingers, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. "You good?" Voss asked. The experiment looked up. "They're afraid." Voss frowned. "Who?" He turned his glowing eyes to Voss. "The Dominion. They don't understand what I am. They don't know how to respond." He closed his eyes for a moment. "They're calling for reinforcements. More ships. Heavier firepower. But there's hesitation. They've never had to fight something like me before." Voss exchanged a glance with Carter. "We need to move now." The evacuation route led through an underground transport tunnel, where a concealed shuttle was ready for launch. The team moved quickly, soldiers guarding their rear as warning lights flickered across the base. Dominion ships were beginning their bombardment. The ground trembled as explosions rippled through the facility. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing a sleek, high-speed vessel prepped for launch. Voss waved the team forward, but just as they reached the ramp, the experiment stopped. Carter turned. "What's wrong?" His eyes glowed brighter. "They've landed more troops. Heavy infantry. They're cutting off this exit." Voss cursed. "How many?" The experiment cocked his head, listening. 47. Heavily armored. Advanced weapons. They believe it's enough." He looked back at Voss. "It's not." Voss exhaled. "You sure?" For the first time, the experiment smiled. "Watch." Before anyone could react, he moved. Faster than the human eye could track, he vanished down the corridor. The Dominion forces barely had time to raise their weapons before he was among them. He ripped through their lines with terrifying precision, dodging plasma fire effortlessly. He disarmed one soldier, caught his weapon midair, and fired 3 pinpoint shots, taking down enemies before they could react. One of the Dominion commanders, encased in a towering exosuit, launched a barrage of micromissiles. The experiment pivoted, weaving through the explosions, his enhanced mind calculating every trajectory before they even launched. He lunged forward, tore through the suit's reinforced plating with his bare hands, and crushed the pilot inside. The remaining Dominion forces hesitated. It was all the opening he needed. He moved like a phantom, striking from impossible angles, adapting in real time. Within seconds, the corridor was silent, bodies littering the floor. Back at the shuttle, the team watched the carnage unfold on their security feeds. Voss exhaled, shaking his head. "That's not a soldier. That's a nightmare." The experiment returned, stepping over the bodies without a second glance. "Path is clear." Voss motioned everyone onto the shuttle. The experiment took a seat in the corner, his expression unreadable. As the engines roared to life, Carter sat beside him. "How do you feel?" He thought for a moment. "Efficient." The shuttle blasted off, streaking through the underground launch tunnel and out into the Martian sky. Dominion ships detected them immediately, moving to intercept. Voss gripped the controls. "Hang on. This is gonna get rough." But the experiment stood, walking toward the airlock. No. Let me handle this. Voss turned. What the hell are you doing? The experiment looked back at him. Showing them why they should fear us. He opened the airlock. Then, without hesitation, he leaped into the void, straight toward the enemy fleet. The Dominion fleet had never encountered anything like this. A lone figure, unaided by a ship, was hurtling through the void toward them. Sensors scrambled to identify the threat, but there was no logical explanation. No species could survive the vacuum of space unaided. No warrior could launch an attack against a fleet without a vessel. And yet, the impossible was happening before their eyes. The experiment twisted mid-air, using micro-adjustments of his body to alter his trajectory with perfect precision. His enhanced mind processed every movement, every calculation, adapting to the shifting battlefield in real time. Plasma turrets locked onto him, their automated targeting system struggling to track something moving at such unnatural speeds. The first volley of plasma fire erupted from the nearest Dominion cruiser. The experiment's body reacted before the shots even left the cannons. He twisted, spun, and maneuvered between the energy blasts with a grace that no biological being should have possessed. To the Dominion officers watching, it was as if reality itself was bending around him. A second wave of fire lit up the darkness, but this time, he didn't dodge. Instead, he reached out, caught hold of a Dominion drone fighter as it passed, and used its momentum to launch himself forward with even greater velocity. He was now a blur, streaking toward the first warship. The bridge of the Dominion cruiser was a scene of chaos. Officers shouted over one another, desperately trying to understand what was happening. Their commander, a seasoned veteran who had overseen countless planetary conquests, gritted his teeth as he watched the approaching anomaly. Increase shield power forward. Prepare to engage with close-range defenses, he barked. But it was too late. The experiment slammed into the outer hull like a meteor, his impact sending shockwaves through the ship's frame. Armor plating buckled, and air vented from the breach. Before damage control protocols could activate, he was already inside. He moved through the corridors like a phantom, tearing through Dominion soldiers with brutal efficiency. Plasma fire lanced through the air, but he was faster. He weaved through the storm of energy, his enhanced reflexes anticipating every shot before it was even fired. He ripped weapons from enemy hands, crushed armor like paper, and dismantled entire squads within seconds. The ship's security systems engaged. Automated turrets unfolded from the walls, locking onto him with deadly precision. He grabbed a fallen soldier's plasma rifle, fired a single shot into an exposed junction in the ceiling, and triggered a chain reaction that fried the turret's control systems before they could even fire. On the bridge, the Dominion commander was frozen in disbelief. He had seen biological horrors, cybernetic monstrosities, and entire planetary exterminations. But nothing like this. Seal the bridge. We must. The blast doors exploded inward. The experiment stepped through the smoke, his glowing eyes scanning the room. The commander barely had time to react before he was hoisted off the ground by an iron grip. "What, are you?" he gasped. The experiment's voice was calm, almost curious. "The beginning of your extinction." With a flick of his wrist, he snapped the commander's neck and let his body drop to the floor. The remaining officers cowered, their weapons trembling in their hands. He ignored them. They weren't worth the effort. Instead, he turned to the control panel, his enhanced mind instantly deciphering the alien systems. With a few precise movements, he disabled the ship's defenses, lowered the hangar shields, and initiated a forced reactor overload. The Dominion fleet outside was still repositioning when they realized the cruiser's energy signature had changed. Alarms screamed through their communication channels. Something was wrong. Then, without warning, the ship erupted in a massive explosion, sending debris hurtling into the surrounding warships. The Dominion formation collapsed into disarray. Amidst the chaos, the experiment launched himself toward the next vessel. He was no longer fighting a battle. He was dismantling an empire, one ship at a time. From their shuttle, Voss and Carter watched in stunned silence as the fleet began to implode. Voss let out a low whistle. That's not a man. That's a force of nature. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. They won't be able to stop him. Voss nodded, eyes locked on the destruction unfolding before them. That's the point. The Dominion fleet was in complete disarray. What had begun as a routine suppression mission had turned into a nightmare beyond comprehension. One by one, their warships fell as the experiment moved through them like a force of nature, adapting, learning, and annihilating everything in his path. Inside the Dominion flagship, panic spread like wildfire. Officers shouted over each other, desperately calling for reinforcements, but no one had answers. No one had ever faced an enemy like this. The Supreme War Marshal of the Dominion, a towering reptilian known as Zyrosk, stood at the command deck, his clawed hands tightening into fists. He had led conquests across hundreds of systems, had broken species that thought themselves strong, had reduced entire civilizations to dust. Yet now, he found himself staring at battle reports that defied all reason. One human, he growled. One soldier is doing this? His advisors hesitated. One finally spoke. He is not just a soldier, War Marshal. He is something else. Zyrosk slammed his fist against the control panel, denting the metal. I don't care what he is. Bring every available warship to this sector. I want him buried under 1,000 plasma barrages. A transmission cut through the command center, overriding their security protocols. Static filled the air, then a voice. Calm. Cold. You can bring 1,000 ships, the experiment said. It won't be enough. Silence. Zyrosk's reptilian eyes widened. The human was speaking directly to them. You misunderstand what is happening here, the voice continued. You believe this is a battle. A conflict you can win. But it isn't. The command center's lights flickered as the Dominion flagship systems were compromised. The experiment was inside their network. This is extinction. The ship's alarm screamed as critical failures cascaded through its systems. Doors locked. Power shut down. Gravity destabilized. The War Marshal bared his teeth in fury. Find him. Kill him. But it was already too late. Deep within the ship, the experiment moved like a shadow, slipping through security measures with impossible speed. Dominion warriors tried to stop him, but they weren't fast enough. They weren't strong enough. They weren't enough. One after another, he dismantled them. Some fought. Some ran. It made no difference. His mind processed each scenario, optimizing every movement. His strikes shattered armor, snapped bones, and ruptured vital organs with surgical precision. On the bridge, Zyrosk's breathing turned ragged as the screams of his soldiers filled the comms. Then, one by one, they fell silent. He grabbed his weapon, a ceremonial blade forged from the bones of fallen enemies. He was no coward. If he was to die, he would do so in combat. The blast doors to the bridge exploded inward. Smoke curled into the room. And then, through the haze, the experiment stepped forward. He was unarmed. He didn't need a weapon. Zyrosk snarled, raising his blade. I will carve the flesh from your bones, human. The experiment tilted his head slightly. Try. Zyrosk lunged. The fight lasted 4 seconds. Zyrosk's blade never touched him. The experiment sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The War Marshal roared in agony as his arm shattered. He barely had time to react before the experiment drove a fist into his chest, cracking his exoskeletal ribs. The reptilian warlord collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Blood dripped from his maw. The experiment knelt before him. Your kind thought themselves invincible. You thought humanity was weak. A species to be conquered. Zyrosk coughed, struggling to speak. We are, the Dominion. The experiment's eyes burned like twin stars. Not anymore. With one swift motion, he crushed the War Marshal's throat. The Dominion flagship was leaderless. Its forces broken. Its will shattered. On the shuttle, Voss and Carter watched as the Dominion fleet scattered, fleeing in all directions. The impossible had happened. The unstoppable force of the galaxy had just been stopped. Voss leaned back, exhaling. We just won, didn't we? Carter's hands were trembling. No. Voss frowned. What do you mean? Carter turned her gaze to the battlefield, where the experiment stood atop the burning ruins of the Dominion fleet. This was just the beginning. The Dominion's retreat sent shockwaves through the galactic order. No species had ever forced them to flee. No civilization had ever stood against their might and survived. And yet, here they were, broken, humiliated, and running from a single human. Across the Dominion-controlled worlds, panic spread like wildfire. Governors demanded reinforcements. Warlords prepared for the worst. The great and terrible Dominion had ruled through absolute power, but now, for the first time, fear gripped their hearts. On Earth, the High Command received the reports in stunned silence. They had expected war. They had braced for annihilation. Instead, they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Admiral Vasquez leaned forward, staring at the battle footage with a mixture of awe and dread. One man did this? Dr. Carter, seated across from him, nodded. Not a man. The experiment. Vasquez shook his head. We knew the project had potential, but this is something else entirely. He didn't just defeat them. He tore through their entire battle doctrine like it was nothing. Voss crossed his arms. Yeah. And that's the problem. The room went silent. Carter frowned. Problem? He just saved us from an invasion. Voss met her gaze. No. He just proved to the entire universe that humanity has something far worse than an invasion force. We didn't just survive. We became the new apex predator. The realization settled over them like a storm cloud. Humanity had spent centuries preparing to defend itself. They had built fleets, weapons, and armies. But all of that now seemed meaningless. The Dominion had been the greatest military force in the galaxy, and a single experiment had shattered them. The balance of power had shifted. Carter swallowed. Other empires will see this and react. The Dominion was feared, but they were predictable. We aren't. They won't let this go unchallenged. Vasquez nodded grimly. They'll come for us. All of them. Voss exhaled. Then we better find him before they do. The experiment moved through the wreckage of the Dominion fleet, scanning the remnants of the warships. Their technology was advanced, but flawed. Predictable. He had already begun deciphering their systems, rewriting their codes, understanding the weaknesses they had never seen in themselves. He was evolving. Every battle, every confrontation, it wasn't just combat. It was learning. Adapting. Optimizing. As he stood amidst the floating debris, his mind stretched outward, sensing the distant signals of approaching vessels. Not Dominion. Someone else. Watching. Waiting. They weren't foolish enough to engage. Not yet. He closed his eyes. He could hear them whispering across the encrypted channels. The galaxy was shifting. The old order was collapsing. And in its place, something new was rising. Something unstoppable. He turned his gaze toward the distant stars, his voice barely a whisper. Let them come. The galaxy watched in silence. The Dominion, once the greatest power in known space, had been shattered by a single human. Fear spread through the remaining empires like wildfire. They had always dismissed humanity as insignificant, a species barely worth acknowledging. Now, they saw the truth. Humanity wasn't weak. It had simply been hiding its strength. Across the stars, alliances formed in secret. Old enemies whispered to one another, unified by a singular, terrifying realization: if they did nothing, they would be next. In a war council deep within the Vascari Imperium, representatives from a dozen powerful civilizations gathered. The air was thick with unease. A reptilian warlord slammed his fist against the table. This cannot be allowed to stand. The Dominion fell in days. Days. If we do not act, our own fleets will burn next. A cybernetic envoy from the Zenith Collective nodded. This anomaly, this human, must be eliminated before he destabilizes the entire galactic order. A chitinous diplomat from the Zaldaran swarm clicked its mandibles. The solution is clear. We must strike before it is too late. We must end this threat before it grows beyond our control. Murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. The decision was made. The greatest armada ever assembled would launch a preemptive strike against humanity. They would not wait for diplomacy. They would not risk negotiation. They would wipe Earth from existence before it could challenge them. The extermination fleet was mobilized. Thousands of warships. Millions of soldiers. Every empire contributing its deadliest weapons. They would do what the Dominion could not. They would erase humanity from the stars. On Earth, the High Command received the intelligence reports with grim expressions. The experiment's victory had painted a target on the entire species. The extermination fleet was coming. Voss paced the war room, fists clenched. They're throwing everything they have at us. We can't hold against those numbers. Not with conventional forces. Carter's voice was steady. Then we don't fight conventionally. Vasquez leaned forward. You're talking about him. Carter met his gaze. You saw what he did to the Dominion. He's our only chance. Voss exhaled. If we can find him. The experiment had disappeared after the battle. No transmissions. No signals. Nothing. He had left the wreckage of the Dominion fleet and vanished into deep space. And now, with the largest armada in history closing in, humanity had days, maybe hours, before annihilation. Carter clenched her fists. Wherever he is, we need him now. In the silent void of space, the experiment drifted among the ruins of a dead world. He had been listening. Watching. The galaxy was afraid. They thought numbers would save them. They thought an overwhelming force would be enough. They didn't understand. He opened his eyes, glowing with an intensity beyond human comprehension. He had studied the Dominion. He had learned from their weaknesses. Now, he would do the same with this new coalition. He would show them the same lesson. Strength wasn't in numbers. It wasn't in fleets or weapons. It was in the mind that saw beyond war. The body that adapted beyond limits. It was in him. The extermination fleet approached. And he was waiting. The extermination fleet arrived in system-wide formation, a vast wall of warships stretching from one end of space to the other. Every empire had sent its best, its most advanced, its most lethal. They had learned from the Dominion's failure. They would not underestimate a single human. Every weapon was primed. Every strategy was calculated. They believed they had prepared for him. They were wrong. On Earth, the High Command watched in grim silence as the enemy fleet filled their screens. There were too many. Far too many. Admiral Vasquez's voice was steady, but his hands clenched behind his back. Our defenses won't hold against that. Carter exhaled. Then it's not up to us anymore. They had tried to find the experiment. They had scoured every system where he might have gone. But he had remained silent. Until now. A single signal cut through every comms channel across the solar system. A single voice. Calm. Unshaken. Stand down. The room went still. Carter whispered, "It's him." Voss shook his head in disbelief. "That's impossible. He's..." Before he could finish, space itself seemed to shift. The coalition warships detected him before they saw him. A gravitational anomaly. A disturbance in the very fabric of reality. Then, he appeared. One figure. Alone. Floating in the darkness between their warships. It made no sense. No ship. No armor. No weapons. Just a human. Yet every admiral in that fleet felt it, a deep, primal dread that their species had never known before. Their orders had been clear. No negotiations. No hesitation. Eradicate him. They opened fire. The void ignited as thousands of plasma beams, missile barrages, and energy cannons converged on a single point. Enough firepower to glass entire planets. And then, silence. When the light faded, he was still there. Untouched. The shots had never reached him. The energy had bent, curved, dissipated before impact. The missiles had lost guidance, twisting away as if space itself rejected them. The experiment raised a hand. And the war began. He moved through their fleet like a storm given form. Warships shattered as he tore through their hulls, ripping through metal like paper. Their strongest shields failed before him. Their best warriors fell before they could react. He wasn't fighting a battle. He was erasing an idea, the idea that power belonged to those who gathered the most ships, the most weapons, the most armies. One by one, the fleets broke. Some ran. Some fought to the end. It made no difference. The galaxy had thought they were gods. He reminded them what it meant to be mortal. In hours, the largest armada ever assembled had ceased to exist. And he remained. On Earth, the war room was silent. No one spoke. No one could. The screens showed the wreckage drifting through space. The thousands of ships that had come to destroy them were gone. The greatest military forces of the galaxy had been wiped from existence. Carter's voice was barely a whisper. He did it. Voss exhaled. No. He ended it. For the first time in history, the galaxy had no ruling power. No warlords. No conquerors. Just silence. And one human. Deep in the void, the experiment gazed upon the ruins of the old order. He had been created as a weapon. A tool for war. But now, there was no war left to fight. The galaxy was his to shape. He turned toward the distant stars, his voice a quiet promise to the universe that had once sought to destroy him. It's time for something new.